I don't care what you do for a living. I don't care how much you like your job. Sometimes work sucks. When you've made someone angry, you can say, here's an opportunity. You ever been in one of those situations where like, hey, it's nothing personal. It's just business. Anyone who says that,
it's always personal.
They just screwed you.
Will Guidara is known as the visionary restaurateur who redefined the dining experience. He is responsible for the naming of 11 Madison Park as the best restaurant in the world. His philosophy of unreasonable hospitality has turned meals into memories where every detail tells a story.
It's absurd to say one restaurant is the best in the world.
Right.
What it actually means is you're the restaurant having the greatest impact.
You fed Jimmy Fallon in space.
Jimmy Fallon, when we became the #1 restaurant in the world, sent me a note, and it said,
welcome to Front Row Seat. I'm Ken Coleman. I truly believe that a good conversation can change your life. So we're all here to have a conversation that will help you get better, level up, and lead well. Our audience is here today to be a representation of you. And in this studio, they have a power to join in at any time, ask a question, and we're going to see where the answers take us. I'm so excited because today our guest is a friend. He's a stud. Will Guidara is the co-owner of 11 Madison Park. He won the best restaurant in the world. It's quite a distinction. And now he's the best-selling author of Unreasonable Hospitality. But I bet you didn't know, Will is also the co-producer on season 3 of the hit series, The Bear. Audience, please help me welcome Will Guidara. So I love that last little nugget because until about a year ago, my 18-year-old son walked in one night and said, "Dad, have you seen The Bear?" And I said to him, "The Bear? No, what is this about?" Fully expecting him to talk about some unbelievable documentary about a real bear.
Yeah.
And he went on to roll his eyes so hard, they almost fell out of his head. He's like, "Dad, trust me, you got to watch it." And I started to watch it. So for those who are fans of The Bear and those who've yet to see it, how did you get involved in this show?
Okay, so as a rule, I don't watch TV about restaurants.
Right.
For me, television...
Too close to home.
Well, yeah, and listen, television is an escape for me.
Right.
I like to watch the kind of television that puts the world on pause, where I can just like lose myself in the narrative. And if it's about what you do for a living, the world does not get put on pause.
Exactly.
But then The Bear came out, and my gosh, I just love that show. I love it because it's about restaurants, yes, but it's about relationships more broadly. And at the end of the day, I'm in the restaurant business, but that's almost a foil for the business I'm actually in, which is the relationship business. And so I was obsessed with The Bear from season 1. And before season 2 came out, the showrunner called me and said, "Hey, can you meet us at our office sometime next week?" And we set up a time. I went out there, and he showed me episode 7 of season 2, which is called Forks, which was about a story in my book. And the book was actually in it. And I think they were showing it to me because they were excited for me to see it, and also to be like, is this cool?
Right,
because it's about to come out. Like, are we good?
Yeah.
And in that same meeting, they said, hey, next season, season 3, it's no longer going to be the sandwich shop. They're actually moving into a proper restaurant. We'd love to bring you on as a writer and a producer. And I was thrilled to do it. And it was cool to me that they added the book in season 2. But I also loved it. I loved it because one of the whole ideas that I try to communicate in Unreasonable Hospitality is the notion that when I was coming up, a lot of people said, you hire for hospitality and you train for excellence. Almost as if to say that some people are hospitable, some people aren't. Hire the ones that are, train on to be great.
Right.
And I don't agree with that as a notion. I think that everyone is hospitable. Everyone has it in them. They just need a leader to inspire it out of them. Because I believe hospitality is this addictive thing. Once you feel it, once you feel the satisfaction of seeing the look on someone else's face when they receive a gift you're responsible for giving them, you want that feeling again. But it's a hard idea to get through in the written word.
Sure.
And in that episode of The Bear, when Richie is polishing forks and does this whole gesture and sprints home in his car, blaring Taylor Swift, you feel like very, very emotionally the idea that even those that don't have a sense of what they want to do in life can find purpose in hospitality, in graciousness, in kindness.
One of the things I've seen in multiple interviews, and I've seen it in speeches, is, and you say, this is my favorite thing to say, so I want to tee you up, because we're talking about excellence here.
Yeah.
And it's like chicken or the egg when it comes to excellence, right? You say that nobility, there is nobility, true nobility in service. I think it's interesting you use that word nobility. It strikes me.
Yeah.
Because the very word noble, right? Like there's this, the kings and queens of yesteryear, and it's like there's this kind of pomp and circumstance around it. But then you drop it into, there's nobility, the highest status that you can achieve, if you will, in actually meeting someone where they are and serving them. I'm assuming, because you're so intentional, that you chose that phrase that way. Unpack that for us, for anybody running a business or for anybody in a professional role. Nobility and service.
Well, so a few things here. Back to the reference, like picture Downton Abbey, right?
Yes.
All the nobles are upstairs. The servers are in the basement.
Right.
And that on its face would carry with it a negative stigma. You are lesser than when you are the person serving others. And when I was coming up in my career, that was kind of the thing. Like when I was growing up, all of my friends' parents wanted my friends to be doctors or bankers or lawyers, right? And going into the service industry felt like you hadn't made it. But I think there is nobility in being called to serve. I heard this great quote from a restaurateur in New York years ago that you have more leverage when you're pushing someone up than when you're trying to pull them. Like intentionally placing yourself underneath someone, that's a choice that brings with it a strong sense of nobility because, I mean, how many people answer the call when they are called to serve? But the reason I talk about the nobility of service so much is because I don't care what you do for a living. You need to take the time to articulate for yourself why the work matters, how you can genuinely impact those around you. Because I don't care how much you like your job, sometimes work sucks. And if you don't know that you're making a real difference, it's impossible to bring your most fully realized self to the work on those difficult days. And so I would spend on a monthly basis, because I believe repetition matters. If you believe in something, you better say it enough times that you grow sick of hearing yourself say it. Otherwise, you've not said it enough for it to bleed into the culture around you. I would say to the team, hey, there is nobility in what we do. We may not be helping save people's lives, but we can help them celebrate the most important moments in their lives. We can give them the grace to forget their most difficult moments. And I would always say, like, we have an opportunity, perhaps even a responsibility, to create our own little magical world in a world that needs more magic. And if we do that, if we inspire people through our kindness, that's a pretty noble way to invest your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellence. You mentioned that just a minute ago.
Yeah.
Number one restaurant in the world. Not an easy thing to achieve, I assume. None of us can really understand all that goes into that. And when I think about that, I have to ask, when you get that distinction, number one restaurant in the world, what's the mix, if there is a mix, of values and systems? Do the values drive the systems? What's that look like to achieve that type of excellence?
Well, yeah, I think values always need to drive the systems. The systems are simply there to allow yourself a heightened ability to be more consistent in expressing and upholding your values. I mean,
so is it true that if you drive systems first and there's not a value attached to it, that you're almost kind of on a treadmill?
Well,
like
yeah.
The converse of that?
Either you're on a treadmill or the systems are unfocused on where they're taking you.
Right, exactly. We're just doing it to do it.
You need to identify what you're trying to be, where you're trying to go, what are the values you want to uphold on your way there, and then create systems to help you do that more effectively and consistently. I mean, excellence. So I talk about excellence in hospitality, which, by the way, are not friends. They actually don't go well together. Excellence is about being perfect. Hospitality is about recognizing that human beings are perfectly imperfect, and hospitality is making human beings feel seen.
Right.
Perfectly imperfect and perfect are not friends, but I believe our success came not in spite of that tension, but because of it. But I do not believe our excellence is the reason we became number one in the world. I think excellence is important. It's a prerequisite to all the stuff I talk about. But excellence is table stakes. Whatever you all do for a living, there's, well, an expectation that you're going to be excellent in pursuit of that. People are paying you for a product. It better be excellent. We became number one because we made the choice to be as unreasonable in pursuit of people as everyone else was simply in pursuit of the product they were selling. And that's where hospitality comes in.
Love that. So when did that hit you? I mean, we don't have time to unpack your entire restaurant journey, but you're general manager of the restaurant that you eventually become co-owner and then number one in the world. What was the decision or what was the series of events? What led to you going, okay, we do excellent work. This is a great restaurant.
Yeah.
But what was that? Was there a light bulb moment? Was it evolution that said, okay, the hospitality piece is what's going to take us to the next level?
Yeah. So I was always the hospitality guy. That was like
that was your thing.
That was my thing. But then I went to work there because I worked there, ran it, and then bought it, owned it, and then eventually sold it. When I started there, it was the first real fine dining restaurant I'd ever been a part of. And sometimes you stop being yourself in an effort to play the game in front of you. And I was like, fine dining, it's not about hospitality. This is about excellence. And so I almost like left a piece of myself behind as I recklessly pursued all of the details that went into creating a perfect restaurant. And it worked. Honestly, we went from 2 stars in the New York Times to 3 stars to 4 stars. We got 3 Michelin stars. We got all the accolades. And then finally we ended up on the list of the 50 best in the world. And I went there real excited. And the way that list works is if you're in the room, you know you're on the list. You just don't know where on the list you fall. They start at 50, they count down to 1.
Okay.
I'm all geared up. I'm like guessing where we're going to fall. They start the countdown. We came in last place.
Of the top 50.
Of the top 50. But
still a rough night for you.
Yeah, but it is a choice, I guess, to look at that as last place, but that's just for better or worse how I'm designed.
Yeah.
My dad always says adversity is a terrible thing to waste. You can't control what life throws at you, but you can control how you react to those moments. And I think it's a beautiful thing because sometimes we glaze over moments of disappointment in an effort to be a cheerleader. I think you need to allow yourself to sit in moments of disappointment, take what you can from them, and then move on. And that night, in frustration, I kind of like went through the stages of grief, ultimately landing on acceptance. Because here's the reality. It's absurd to say one restaurant is the best in the world.
Right.
It's too subjective.
Right.
There's too many restaurants. When you earn the top spot on that list, what it actually means is you're the restaurant having the greatest impact on the world of restaurants.
That's good.
Up until that point, all the restaurants that had been number one were run by chefs. I'm not a chef. I'm a dining room guy. And each of those chefs was unreasonable in pursuit of their product and relentless in pursuit of change. I think when you want, to make your impact, when you want to win, when you want to like really rise above, you need to look inside of yourself and identify what is your superpower.
Right.
What do you have that's different from what other people have? And in that room, I was the only dining room guy. And I realized that the best way for me to make my impact was to go back to the thing that got me to that restaurant in the first place, which was hospitality. And so that night on a cocktail napkin, which I still have, I wrote, "We will be number one."
Yeah.
But a goal without a strategy is nothing more than a pipe dream.
Yes.
And that's when I wrote Unreasonable Hospitality, deciding that if they became number one by being unreasonable in pursuit of product, we would by being unreasonable in pursuit of people. And from that point forward, it was a years-long journey of figuring out what that meant.
Right.
And bringing it to life and bringing the entire team along with me as we did.
That's where I want to stay for a minute because this is a great leadership lesson, I believe, here. In that year of figuring out what does that look like, once you got a sense of it, how did you cast that vision? Because you've got front of house, back of house.
Yeah.
This is a diverse team in the restaurant business.
Yeah.
How did you cast and implement that vision of that unreasonableness? Like where someone goes, I'm empowered to be unreasonable.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of leaders right now are listening, watching, going, I can apply this.
Yeah.
What'd you do?
And by the way, restaurants at the end of the day, like I've now worked in enough different industries, they're all analogous.
Right.
Right? In the restaurant industry, there's the kitchen who they think the dining room is lazy. The dining room thinks the kitchen
Right.
are filled with jerks, right? There's editors and producers and publishers. And like,
Yes.
if you look in your own business, you can identify who plays what role.
That's right.
I mean, when I got back to the restaurant, I had 2 jobs, which I believe are the same 2 jobs every leader has every day they go into their business. One was to tell the team where we were going. We're going to be number 1. It's going to take us years. We're going to get there through unreasonable hospitality. People crave convicted leadership. They
Yes.
crave direction.
That's absolutely right.
2 was to invite anyone who wanted to take a seat at the table with me such that we could collectively figure out how to get there. People crave a sense of ownership.
Yes.
And so if you can do both of those things, if you can say, hey, this is not designed by committee, we're going here.
Right.
But everyone has a voice in helping us figure out how we're going to get there. If you can carry those 2 things, I've always found it is nothing short of extraordinary what you can accomplish.
Yeah. I want to take this to a Main Street situation in America. Let's take 2 big quick service brands, fast food brands.
Okay.
Let's take Chick-fil-A and McDonald's.
Okay.
So you got McDonald's, been around forever,
Yeah.
right? Kind of the brand for fast food in America. Then Chick-fil-A comes along, right? And they're in the chicken business. Little research pulls up that McDonald's has got 4 times the size of Chick-fil-A as far as just footprint and restaurants out there. Is open 4 more days per month because Chick-fil-A is famously closed on Sundays.
Yep.
Yet, the average location revenue is less than half of Chick-fil-A's. So the question is it what you serve or how you serve it?
Oh. Well, again.
Or is that the wrong question?
No, I think it's the right question. It's just, I think it's not either or a little bit. So excellence is table stakes.
Right.
Right? You need to have a good product to start. Now,
Right.
there's plenty of people who don't like McDonald's food. There's plenty of people less people that don't like Chick-fil-A.
That's right.
But you could say that both are serving something that people enjoy eating.
Right.
I think almost always it comes down to how you serve.
Yes.
I like to talk about this idea that every company is always in search of its competitive advantage, right? What is the thing about what they do that's going to prevent a new person from coming in and stealing their business? But yet, almost always, they're thinking in terms of the quality of their product or the strength of their brand. Here's the thing. It does not just matter how good the product is and how strong the brand is, because eventually, and this is not my opinion, this is a fact, time has proven it to be true, eventually someone is going to come around and they're going to build a better product.
That's right.
They're going to create a stronger brand. They might be better capitalized. They might be younger as they're bringing a fresher perspective. They might just be better at it than you are.
Yes.
The only real competitive advantage that exists, at least over the long term, that comes through hospitality, through consistently and generously investing in relationships because, well, relationships take a long time to build, and if you build them in the right way, they take a long time to erode. So you look at McDonald's and Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A, I forget its mission statement. I don't have it offhand, but I've read it enough times to know that it makes very clear that throughput is not the focus. Graciousness and retention of their customers is. And so they make every decision with that one thing in mind. And whether that's in the taking the time to say my pleasure, whether it's in refilling someone's soft drink at the table.
My all-time favorite.
The refilling of the soft drink.
When that started happening, of course, I'm like every other young parent. We had 3 kids under the age of 3. So the way we did it, I wouldn't recommend it to young couples. It was insane. But I remember that just being such a big deal because you're just trying to keep the chaos under control at the table. And the nice, sweet, elderly lady comes by and, would you like some more lemonade, dear? And it's like, oh, it's like an oasis.
But let's talk about how, if only viewed through a conventional business lens,
right,
it's objectively foolish.
Yeah.
You're paying an extra person.
Right.
You're giving more product away for free. And you're keeping people in the restaurant longer and by definition have an inability to turn that table as quickly as you want.
That's a great point.
Yet they're doing it because they believe if they invest in that relationship, that will be the thing that builds their competitive advantage.
Yeah.
Now, you look at McDonald's, and I'm so sorry, people at McDonald's.
Yeah,
I'm
we're
not
not
trying
bashing McDonald's at all.
But like the thing they're notorious for is people love the soft serve at McDonald's, and yet half the time the soft serve machines are broken.
Right.
And you go there,
true.
and the soft serve machine's broken, and that is, well, it erodes loyalty. It erodes trust. And that's I don't even know why that is the case. That's actually maybe not the best way to make the point. But the idea is this. One is focused on people. One is focused on profit. And the crazy part, this is the thing about relationships. There's the old economist that says what gets measured gets managed.
Yes.
Right? I believe that hospitality and relationships are harder to measure, but that doesn't mean the impact isn't there. I think, in fact, it's so impactful, it's just impossible to quantify.
Yeah.
And that example is proof of it.
Yeah.
When you focus on people over profit, you end up being more profitable.
So true.
It just requires a leap of faith and a belief that like good begets good.
You have reduced, I think, in a powerful way, hospitality and excellence. I just really think I love both of the tension between the two.
Yeah.
But you've reduced it, I think, to such a great way for everybody in any business, in any position as a professional, in that moment where they're interacting with a human. And I saw this in one of your talks where you said, it's just our job to make people feel seen. And that's the right reduction.
For sure.
I think you've got that all the way down to the common denominator for every professional who wants to win, for every leader, business owner, solopreneur. If you can do that well, you got a fighting chance.
Well, okay, so one of the biggest things that I try to make sure people understand is that service and hospitality are not the same thing. I think way too often they're conflated as being one and the same, and the extent to which an individual or an organization understands that they're different, that's the first step towards actually building a culture of hospitality. Service is the thing that you do.
Right.
In my world, it's getting the right plate of food to the right person within the right amount of time.
Right.
It's a part of the product.
Yeah.
Hospitality is how you make people feel when you're doing that thing. Now, one of the things I've found is people understand that intellectually, but they have a hard time understanding, well, if I do this, is this service or is it hospitality? And the best way to think through that distinction is what you just said. Does the gesture make the person receiving it feel seen as an individual or not? If they don't, it's just good service. If they do, that's hospitality. And when you commit to making people feel seen, you're recognizing that the greatest success comes not through one-size-fits-all ideas, but one-size-fits-one ideas, where you're slowing down for long enough to actually engage with a human being and give them a genuine sense of connection to you and to the brand that you represent. And when you do that, gosh, it's remarkable.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. You've probably heard people talk about different kinds of flags in relationships. Red flags, green flags, even beige flags. You know, it's hard enough to keep track of what they're all supposed to mean, much less keep them in mind when you're trying to balance relationships with health, family, and work. So here's a tip. Don't waste time on arbitrary labels. Just focus on the values that you share with the people in your life. Stuff like faith, honesty, communication, and work ethic. And if you're not even sure what your values are, therapy can help you figure them out. Find what you're looking for in your relationships and decide your non-negotiables. That's why I recommend BetterHelp. BetterHelp is 100% online therapy with licensed therapists. That means that you can talk with your therapist when it's convenient for your schedule. All you do is fill out a short online survey to get matched with a therapist. Plus, you can switch providers at any time for no additional cost. So whether you're dating, married, finding friends, or just working on yourself, do it with help from BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Ken. to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/Ken. I have to have you tell it. And if anybody follows you, they've heard the story. But for people who haven't heard it, and if you've heard it, it's worth a retell. This is the principle of the street dog.
Oh, yeah.
And that to me is my favorite story of you being in the moment and seeing somebody.
Yes.
And making them feel seen. Please tell that story about how that happened.
Well, so if when I wrote Unreasonable Hospitality, that was the light bulb moment in identifying the direction we wanted to go. Sometimes you write something down and you actually don't know what it means yet.
Right.
Like I wrote Unreasonable Hospitality on that cocktail
Sounds
napkin,
good.
went back to the restaurant. I had no freaking clue what that even meant, but I think that's okay.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we can spend so much time trying to perfectly articulate a goal that we never start pursuing one.
Yes.
I believe in this strongly. If you feel a connection to a thought, you need to trust in the fact that as you pursue it, it will reveal itself to you along the way.
That's really good.
And so we started trying to unpack it, and we made a lot of progress. But then one day, I found myself in the dining room on a busier than normal lunch service helping out the team. By the way, there's a lesson there. If you end up at the top of the hierarchy and you're in a situation where you're making the choice to help the people that work for you, help them by doing the most menial task.
Yeah.
It's a great way to send a message that you're never going to ask them to do something you're not willing to do yourself.
That's good.
And so I was clearing appetizers, dirty plates from a table of
you're
4.
bussing tables.
I was bussing tables.
Love it.
And they were foodies, Europeans on vacation to New York, just to eat at restaurants.
Yeah.
In fact, this was their last meal. They were going straight to the airport to head back home afterwards. And while I was there, I overheard them talking about their trip. They'd been to all the best restaurants, Per Se, Daniel, Jean-Georges, insert French restaurant name here.
Right.
That had the time of their lives. But then one woman jumped in and said, yeah, but you know what we never got to have? We never had a New York City hot dog. And it was like one of those light bulb moments in a cartoon.
Yeah.
I went back into the kitchen, dropped off the plates, ran outside. There was a hot dog cart right in front of the restaurant.
Fortunately.
Thank God. That was
New York.
That was
Never gonna have a
fortunate
problem.
for me plenty of other days, not just.
Right.
Bought a hot dog, ran back inside. Then came the hard part, convincing my fancy Swiss chef to serve it in our fancy restaurant.
My favorite part of the story.
But I convinced him to trust me.
What was the first initial look and reaction when you literally show up in the kitchen with
my
this
God.
street dog?
I mean, he looked at me like I'd lost my mind. But we had this word. It's important to me.
Yeah.
This phrase.
Yeah.
I think when you're lucky enough to work alongside like-minded people who are as passionate as you are about a destination, there's always tension.
Yeah.
Because you're going to disagree on the right way to get there. And so we had mechanisms to work through disagreements. And one of those was every once in a while you could play that card.
I like that.
This is important to me. And the other person just had to go along with it. And so we cut the hot dog up into 4 perfect pieces, and we put one on each plate, a little swish of ketchup, a swish of mustard, made it look super fancy, a little micro herb or something. And then before their final savory course, which was our signature honey lavender glazed Muscovy duck that had been dry aged for 2 weeks,
Yes.
I brought out what we in New York call a dirty water dog to their table. And I explained it. I said, hey, I overheard you before. Just want to make sure you don't go home with any culinary regrets. Here's that New York City hot dog. And they freaked out.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. I've worked in the best restaurants in America. I've served millions of dollars worth of food. Lobster, caviar, whatever, you name it. To that point, I'd never seen anyone react to anything I'd served them like they did to that hot dog.
Yeah.
You know, athletes are always going to the tapes and they've had a bad game to see what they did wrong, try to make sure they don't repeat those mistakes. What none of us do often enough is go to the tapes when we've had a good game to see what we did well, to make sure we keep on doing that thing. And it was going to the tapes on that hot dog, to your point, a system to perpetuate a value system.
Yes.
That's when we were able to bring this philosophy to life on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, and it just grew from there. Some legendary stories. I want to. You just mentioned something about kind of watching that positive tape, but I actually want to have you talk about negative feedback because I think everybody's scared of it. It's not fun for anybody, but it's very helpful. It's how we grow.
Yeah.
I saw that you once said, if I had endless hours in the day, I'd read everything ever written about me.
Yes.
are you psychotic? Is that just like, I read that and I was like, oh man, but I do appreciate that. Where's that come from? What's the...
So that's not in a like, I love reading about myself, just to be super...
Oh, no. It's about the negative comments.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's about,
listen,
like reading that.
I think if you're in the business of making people happy,
Yeah.
if you stop reading what people think of what you do, you're going to become irrelevant.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Like you need...
What if it's crazy? What if you know it's nuts? Do you still take a kernel of truth from it?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
well,
maturity.
no. I shouldn't say, do I take the kernel of truth?
I mean,
Not
if you read
necessarily.
something negative where you know it's not
I'm
correct.
always open and trying to find a kernel of truth.
Got you.
Here's the...
That's good.
I like to gamify everything
Okay.
in life.
All right.
I actually think it's one of my superpowers as a leader because I don't care how much you like your job. Playing is more fun than working.
Yes.
My longtime boss, forever mentor, Danny Meyer,
Yeah.
one of his expressions that I've always loved is athletic hospitality. I think hospitality is a game, right?
Yeah.
And his expression that would go along with that was the road to success is paved with mistakes well handled. When you've made someone angry, you can either take that personally and get really emotional and feel like you failed, or you can say, here's an opportunity, right? Because there's this rule that it's a scientific principle that details how we remember experiences. It's called the peak end rule. People really remember an experience based on two things: the peak, so the furthest deviation from zero,
Okay.
positive or negative,
Okay.
and the end. That's great because it allows you to figure out where you want to invest your focus when you're crafting an experience. It's also incredibly cathartic because it means you can always win. You get to define when the end is. The end doesn't come until you stop trying. And no matter how bad the peak is in a negative direction, if you just redefine it by a slightly bigger peak in the positive direction, now you have a great ending
Yes.
and a positive peak. Wow. What I like when someone is upset, and let's say we say, okay, but if it's an insane thing, okay, perception versus reality, if you look hard enough through someone else's lens, generally you can understand it and
Yes.
figure out a way to repair it.
Right.
But most of my biggest regulars have been people that were upset in the beginning. Because with someone normal, this is zero, I just have to invest this much effort to make them happy. That is sticky
Right.
to a point.
Yeah.
But if you're down here and I have to invest all the effort to bring you from here all the way here, people feel how hard I was willing
Yeah,
to work to
that's
get
good.
you on my side. And that earns trust. And so I like reading all the negative comments because I might learn something that'll allow me to be even just 1% better. But I also like reading them because for me, it's also a game. I love playing it. I want to make as many people happy as possible. And if I can see someone that's upset and work super hard to turn them around,
Yeah.
people are 5 times more likely to talk about things they don't like than they are things they do
No
like.
question.
And so, I mean, it's just a good business practice to try to make sure that everyone has
Yeah.
the best taste in their mouth at the end. And
I think that's such an unbelievably mature response that I think a lot of people have a hard time just processing that because negative comments stick with us a lot longer.
Yeah.
Like you could have 99 positive comments and 1 negative, and the one you're going to get stuck on
For
is
sure.
the negative. So you have had to gamify almost to be able to overcome that normal psychological behavior. True?
for sure, I've also had to work very hard to not skip the 99 positive comments.
Exactly.
Because I am designed to read the beginning of a comment and it looks good, I skip to the next one.
Right.
That's unhealthy as well.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll say about the repair part, there's a book called Good Inside, Dr. Becky Kennedy. It's an amazing book about parenting. And she was at my conference just last week, and I was interviewing her on stage. And she said this one thing, which I thought was so beautiful as it pertained to parenting, but I think it pertains to leadership and service as well. If you read a chapter in a book, and the chapter is, guest came into restaurant, had a terrible time, posted something on Yelp, this restaurant is the worst in the world. If you let the chapter end there, that's the title of the chapter. If you write a few more pages at the end of the chapter, not only do you leave the chapter with a happier ending, you actually change the title of the chapter.
That's right.
Had a negative experience at the restaurant, but they worked so hard to turn it around that I now think they're the best people ever.
Wow.
Right? And it just takes a little bit more effort at the end, and not to allow yourself to be so emotional, like, oh, they hurt my feelings. I'm working super hard. They're a jerk. They don't like what I do. They must be bad, right?
Right.
I think we need to be emotional about business because, I mean, everyone says, have you ever been in one of those situations where like, hey, it's nothing personal. It's just business. You're like, okay, I hate you. Right.
You're right.
Like,
I've never believed that.
Anyone who says that,
it's always personal.
they just screwed you.
That's exactly
Anyone who just
right.
says it's not personal, it's just business, they've just screwed you.
Exactly right.
Business is personal. If you're good at it, it's an authentic representation of who you are.
Yes.
But there are times when you need to be unemotional about business.
Yeah.
And when someone is criticizing you, you can't bring emotion into criticism. Otherwise, you have an inability to find the good that exists within it.
Oh, it's so good.
So in addition to that, in your book, you talk about the critic that came the second time, and you were trying to improve the restaurant after you got, I think, in the top 50, and you weren't quite there. But I think that critic that kind of gave you a negative review kind of seemed like it spurred on that emotion, that fire to kind of go a different direction that ultimately got to you. And on that same topic, can you talk about maybe how that fed into a negative criticism into something that turned into a huge positive, I think?
Yeah. So what he's talking about is at a certain point in our evolution from 50 to 1, we were inspired to really craft this experience that was all about New York, that had a sense of place in New York. Every ingredient was from New York. Every plate was made in New York. Every course told a part of the history of New York. And I believe in the economy of words when you're engaging someone. Like, you want to get as much across in as few words as possible. And we were packing so much into this menu, and I wanted the guests to hear everything, that I went against everything I believe in. Didn't trust their ability to communicate what I wanted to communicate in the way I wanted it communicated. So I effectively wrote scripts, and everyone on the team had to memorize them. It was not my proudest moment. I watch him eating the meal. There's this hilarious relationship between restaurateurs and food critics where you pretend you don't know who they are, they pretend they don't know you don't know who they are, and it's this whole thing. So I'm watching him from behind like the coffee station, and we nail it. Perfect table, perfect server, perfect timing, everything's perfect. He walks out, first time ever, New York Times food critic and I make eye contact. He looks at me and he nods, and I'm like, we crushed it. He leaves the restaurant. 3 days later, article. At the new 11 Madison Park, the words fail the food. He went on to rave about the food, but saying the way we talked about it was so bad, it ruined the entire meal.
Oh.
He went so far as to say it felt like a Seder hosted by Presbyterians. And it was one of those
Very specific description.
horrifyingly bad reviews, made worse due to the fact that it was my fault. 150 people looking to me for leadership, and it was my decision that had run counter to everything I believed in. Once I took a breath and had the hindsight to realize it, that I'd let them down. In those moments, a leader has a couple choices. Way too many leaders feel that in order to be a good leader, they need to pretend to be perfect because they feel like that's what's expected of them. And that means when you make a mistake, you don't acknowledge making a mistake, because if you don't acknowledge it, it means you didn't make it, which is BS. Obviously, everyone knows when you've made a mistake.
Yeah.
And sometimes the best thing you can do as a leader is to actually just step up and say, I'm sorry. And I did this wrong, and this is what I've learned from it, and I promise to work hard to not do it again. The beautiful thing when you do that is twofold. One, if you're willing to criticize yourself, people are going to be that much more willing to receive criticism from you. And when you actually allow yourself to be a perfectly imperfect human, then people know you're not lying, and they trust you. And when they fully trust you, they're going to be that much more willing to follow you. We got rid of a bunch of stuff from the menu. He didn't like a lot of it. We kept some of the things he didn't like. You can't be all things to all people, otherwise you lose your point of view.
Right.
But we did respond to some of the other things that he didn't like, and most importantly, I ditched the scripts and started trusting my team again to do what was right, because I'd trained them well enough that I should have done that in the first place.
Yeah. Wow. That's really good. Great question. I love that. I want to get to two topics. And again, audience, you can raise your hand at any time. We'll get to you. Two current topics, because I really want your take on them. One is a personal irritant. So it's tipping. When I go to a nice restaurant with my wife or family or whatever, obviously I expect a tip. But now I'm showing up at coffee shops. I'm showing up at multiple places where I'm heavily encouraged to tip because they spin the monitor around on me every American.
And they make dead eye contact with you.
And all of a sudden I've got to make this choice. And I think we've all experienced that. But in all seriousness, is that just nothing more than an upcharge right now? It's a crafty way to get a little bit more money.
Gosh, I mean.
How do you feel about that?
Okay, when you're at a restaurant, sit-down restaurant.
Yeah.
I believe the difference between a good tip and an extraordinary tip is not that much. I always like to leave an extraordinary tip.
Sure.
When I'm standing up and I'm asked to tip, I'm still conflicted about it.
Right.
I mean, the reality is in most of these places, the restaurant industry is not the most profitable industry, right?
That's correct, yeah.
And as a dining public, we are not actually prepared to pay as much as what things should cost,
right,
in order to, like, it's funny, if you were to poll a group of people, everyone would say, you, McDonald's, are underpaying your workforce, and don't raise the price of a cheeseburger by $1, right? Like, people want their cake and they want to eat it too. And so tips, I think, have become a way to take a lot of people who work really hard and try to get them a little closer to earning a living wage without alienating their fan base by charging too much. But then in other places, it feels like it's just predatory.
Yeah.
I, having been in that industry for a really long time, generally err on the side of just sucking it up and tipping. Mm-hmm. But what I do, this is my rule, if there's people where they say, and it's going to ask you a question, and the moment they flip that thing around, they turn their back and go somewhere else, I don't feel the emotional pressure to tip. When they do that, I always tip.
Okay.
When they look at me and make me feel awkward about it, sometimes I'm like, no. I do not like the spirit of this transaction anymore. Not today.
I like that, yeah.
And because I just do think, like, a tip is meant to be this discretionary added thing given in appreciation.
Yeah.
Not mandated out of some sense of responsibility. Yeah. And I don't like when people make that experience feel overly transactional because it undermines the very core of what it's meant to represent.
Yeah. Is the state of service, I read articles about this, I see things online, curious your take, is the state of service across the country, in your opinion, has it gone down since the pandemic? Has it stayed the same and we're just looking for something to gripe about? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, well, in proper restaurants, it struggled a little bit. I think during the pandemic, a lot of people left the restaurant industry and went into other industries, and it's going to take a while to rebuild. Here's the thing. The state of service in America is far bigger than restaurants, right? That's airlines. Right. And is a symptom of the state of leadership in America. Mm-hmm. Service is good at companies where leadership is good.
Yes.
Service is bad at companies where leadership is bad.
It's a great statement.
And so I just feel like it's an unhealthy conversation to have because I've heard the same thing. Service is declining in America. No.
Leadership is declining.
Let's treat the underlying illness, which is that leadership is declining.
Yes.
And people are not giving their teams the tools required to succeed. And those tools are either training or inspiration.
Yes.
Or empowerment, whatever it ends up being. Well, but I think when leaders complain that the service in their companies is not good, they need to hold up a mirror because it ultimately starts with them.
That's exactly right. Okay, one other current topic. It's in the news every day in some form or fashion. You and I emailed this weekend, and it was one of the things that I had prepared to ask you about. And when I said, "Hey, what are you what are you hot on right now?" and you're like, "I want to talk about AI and the now emerging importance of the human touch." Talk about AI and how important you think that human connection is going to be because of AI.
Yeah, listen, AI, I feel like, is the cherry on top of something that's been happening since COVID, honestly. I mean, the pandemic, I think, was a an important reminder to everyone of our innate and basic human need for connection with other people. I think there's a lot of people, a lot of introverts in my life who didn't think they needed people until they were deprived of people. And they're like, gosh, I actually really need this. And then what followed? Hybrid and remote work. And then the digital transformation, which we've been going through for a while now, right? Like once upon a time, we used to go to stores to buy toilet paper. Now we go on Amazon, right? And now it's being particularly exaggerated through AI. It's all led us to this place where I just really believe the human moments need to be as humanly possible. Not just because it's good for the soul, but also because it's good for business. They are less frequent. They are more fleeting.
Yes.
And that makes them precious. And if you waste one of them, it's irresponsible. And I think they become more human when you're more intentional in pursuit of them, and that is at the very core of hospitality. I think AI in many ways is going to be actually great for hospitality. I think it's going to take a lot of the stuff that I've done for years in smaller environments and make those things more scalable, but only if it's used as a tool in a human being's toolkit.
That's right.
As opposed to something that completely replaces human beings.
That's right. Yeah, that's a great distinction there. Not a substitute for the human touch, but used by the human touch.
Yeah.
It's really good. I got more questions, but I want the audience, those of you that are here, you've traveled. Yeah, right here. I knew you have them. It usually takes one, and nobody wants to be first. Go ahead.
So when it comes, a lot of people have decision-making processes where a decision needs to be made, and they have a routine they follow to decide which way they're going to go. So what's your decision-making process with the perspective of hospitality?
With the perspective of hospitality, or just any decision being made in the business?
So like I'm in the middle of trying to streamline my business because it's a one-man show, and I've thought about AI and things like that. So when I'm deciding to use a certain software, I'm not sure whether it's going to take away the human touch and not be as hospitable, or if it really doesn't matter.
Okay, so first, you say it's a one-man show.
As far as like operations.
But there are people that work with you.
Correct.
Okay. There's a quote by David Marquet, who was a retired naval captain. He says, in too many organizations, the people at the top have all the authority and none of the information, where the people on the front line have all the information and none of the authority. How I always tried to make every decision was to get enough people around the table such that we could bridge the gap between authority and information. But at the end of the day, every business needs one point of view through which everything funnels. My job was to listen, learn, hear as many different viewpoints as possible, and then ultimately make a decision. Now, decisions as far as hospitality is concerned, well, in the same way that systems are meant to consistently uphold a value system, you need to know what your value system is. For me, that's the purpose of a mission statement, is really to be a tool that leaders can use to help make decisions. If you have a good mission statement, it should identify what you've decided is a non-negotiable, or what your collective non-negotiables are. And then when you look at every decision, if you ask yourself what right looks like through the lens of that mission, armed with the information you've gathered from the team as a whole, you're still going to make mistakes, but you're going to make far fewer. And I think it's the right way to approach it. Does that make sense?
Sure does.
Do you have follow-up questions on it?
I do not. I like how you like values, because I never had it put like that before, like your systems are based on your values. I really think that would help me in my situation.
Yeah, I love that. You know, it reminds me of Chick-fil-A. Yeah. Because if you go back to Truett Cathy, the founder, if you go to a Chick-fil-A right here in Williamson County and you order something and you say thank you, they're going to say,
my pleasure.
You go to Texas tonight and get a chicken sandwich, they're going to say the same thing. So you start wondering, is that a values or a system? Is it a system where they just said, we are going to say this every time?
Yeah.
No, it is absolutely not. It was a value that Truett Cathy wanted people to know. It is our pleasure to serve you a chicken sandwich.
Yeah,
Thus,
the system perpetuates the value now.
Now it does. So they say because of that, how do we drive that point home?
Yeah.
Every time somebody says thank you, this is our response. But it was the value that drove the systemic, this is the thing we do.
But also to the point of like leaders feeling the need to be perfect. What that results in a leader not getting like the people in the front line of their business into a room and saying, hey guys, I'm trying to make this decision and I'm not exactly sure what the right answer is. Does anyone have any feedback? Love some help on this. Most leaders don't do that because they don't want their team to think they're weak when, gosh, that's an expression of strength.
By the way, they already know we're weak anyway.
Yeah. Anytime you don't want someone to know something about you, it is very likely they already know that thing.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, anybody else?
So I worked at Disney in college, and one of the things that I think they did really well is empower the frontline workers to do guest recoveries. So I was a photographer, and so I would take the photos as you come in the park with the castle behind, and
Yeah.
so a lot of times guests would come in after to buy photos. This was back when a lot of people were still buying prints and that kind of thing. Less was on the app and all that, and so people would come in and say, hey, we want to buy these photos. And then, in the process of printing them out, it would be, oh, well, what did you wish we had gotten to do today? Well, I wish we had gotten to ride they're talking as a family. And a lot of times it'd be, oh, I wish we had met this character or we had been able to do this line, but we didn't have time and those things. And so we would be able to do a guest recovery, say, hey, here's a piece of paper that lets you go to that ride and skip the line. And so they would empower us to do that. How do you think that's implemented in a small business, small to medium-sized business, like a moving business or small production agency, those things? How do you think?
Let's stay there. So how many, give Will an idea how many people you have on your team and what their roles are in interacting with the customer. That might help.
So there's 6 of us. And I would say we have our production team's about 4 typically. Obviously it scales up and down depending on the size of the production. But typically we have a production lead that's there that's kind of in a producer role. And then, we'll have an audio, a couple camera ops and those things on a typical shoot.
I mean, if Disney can do it at that scale, then you have zero excuses not to do it at your scale.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously,
Sure.
right? Like the entire idea is getting out of the way of your team and letting them do what they're good at and giving them the resources and then setting reasonable expectations for what the boundaries are. Right? And whether that's, hey, this is your budget on a monthly basis to do guest recovery or just to give crazy hospitality. And when you do it, I'd love you to share back what you've done and how you've spent that money or what kind of stuff you've done. Not only so I understand what our collective approach is, but so I have an opportunity to celebrate you when you do all the amazing stuff I know you're going to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, gosh, if they can do it,
Yeah.
You have to do it. And that's, by the way, one of the central ideas of what I write and talk about is I've yet to meet a single individual that won't give more of themselves to help something succeed than once they feel a genuine hand in defining what that thing is. There's a UPS store in Sarasota near where my parents live, and my dad went in there and was shipping something, and the guy looked at his last name. He's like, Guidara, is that any relationship to Will Guidara? My dad's like, yeah. He's like, oh my gosh, I read his book, da-da-da-da, and like talked about how he uses Unreasonable hospitality at his UPS store. And one of the things he does, I think this is so brilliant, everyone on his team, all the hourly employees, they don't get to, they have to comp one person a day. So if you go in there to print something or photocopy or ship something, every day they have to pick one person and say, today it's with our compliments.
That's great.
What that results in is 2 things. One, and imagine like getting comped at the UPS store. You're going to be like, oh my God, the world is just awesome. And you're going to tell people about it. Like
Right,
if when I saw you earlier today,
Yeah.
if I'd gone to UPS today and they comped me, I'd be like, bro,
Right.
I went to send some mail today, and they just, for no reason, just random act of kindness.
Yeah, extra bubble wrap.
Yeah.
I love the bubble wrap. I get excited about that, just popping the bubbles.
Yeah. Well, my kids, too.
Exactly.
But the meta thing here is that they have to work that much harder to get to know every single person that walks in, such that they can decide who they're going to use their comp on.
That's good. So in your business, you got to figure out,
Right.
what is that? What's that front of the line for the ride? What's that free shipping?
Yeah.
You got to figure out what that is, because it is a unique thing.
Sure.
Anything pop to your top of your mind? I know we're putting you on the spot, but I'm curious.
No, I mean, I think practically probably something like, oh, do we have a shoot over lunch? Like, we're going to bring lunch in for the customer's team, while we're there. Something like that.
That's pretty great.
Typically, like, we just finished, once a year, we typically will bring, just kind of on a whim, donuts and coffee to, we do a lot of work for ad agencies. And so we'll bring donuts and coffee, just kind of show up one morning with donuts and coffee for the team. So we do that from a B2B standpoint, but more from a B2C standpoint. I think just getting creative with those ideas.
Yeah.
And here's the deal. If you start doing it, one day someone on your team is going to do something, and you are going to hate what they did. You're going to hate it. You're going to think it was the worst idea. And that is when you will be tested in your resolve as a leader to do the right thing within your organization. Do you pull the plug on the entire thing, or do you recognize that it's not always going to be perfect, but they're going to feel that much more empowered, and you're going to be doing a lot more cool stuff for a lot more people if you don't serve as a bottleneck, and then you see that as a learning opportunity, and you keep going.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, hey, I don't love the idea, but I love the heart.
Yeah, and this
We're
is
gonna
why I
back
don't
you.
love it, and let's brainstorm what we would do next time that exact same situation presents itself.
I love that. And that's an opportunity as a leader to kind of say, hey, bring that, next time, just bring the idea to me. I promise you I'm going to support you, but let's see if we can come up with that best thing.
Yeah.
That's really good.
But not even next time bring it to me. Next time, try it this way.
Right, yeah. Still empower them.
Yeah, you
Try
still,
it this
you
way.
don't, yeah.
Gotcha. That's good. Good catch on that. No, I think that's, I acknowledge that. I think that's right, because you don't want to clip their wings on that.
Yeah, like there's just few things that feel better than just like having an idea and just being able to do it without asking for approval. The more responsibility you give people,
Right.
the more responsible
Well, that's
they
that
become.
leading like a coach. It's like, hey, here's the deal. Here's how you could have run that play. Get back out there.
Yeah.
They don't bench you. They
Yeah.
put you back out for the next play.
Yeah, and it's not like, hey, next time you have an idea, run over to the sidelines. Let me just approve it real quick. Like,
Yeah.
you know?
No, that's a great point. I love that. Anybody else? Okay, here we go.
This is going to be a little selfish, but direct, but I didn't want to pass up this opportunity. So we, on the IT side of things, so it's IT services, we're calling it, like most of the work we do is remote. So we're not there. There's very little we can give them, and sometimes you can't pick up on clues, right? Just because you're just having a conversation. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on like, how do you remotely delight someone on the other end? How do you provide that extra space, that extra measure, outside of just being nice? Like our team's great. Like they listen, they listen first, then respond, all the things. But I don't know that any interaction, like how do you up the game there? Like we have other folks that manage the relationships with the clients, but they're not touching it nearly the volume, right? Because we have all these calls from a bigger company. So that we're having all these one-on-one interactions. How do you do it at scale? How do you do it remotely is a big challenge for us.
So, okay, one of my favorite things with what you're talking about, whether it's remote or in person, is this idea of pattern recognition for recurring moments. Every business, every department within every business, there are recurring moments, things that just present themselves over and over and over again. And if you, with your team, sit down one day and you're like, let's figure out what all those are. Like you think about in a restaurant, someone gets engaged. On an airplane, someone has a crying baby. Whatever. There's like a million of them in every business. If you can identify those in advance, and then in advance with your team, get creative and decide how you want to react every time that thing happens, you can start creating magic all the time. An example of one, remote, you guys know Chewy, the pet food company? I'm sure some of you already know what I'm about to tell you, but if you have a dog, go into Chewy, sign up. The beginning of every month, dog food arrives like clockwork at your house. You never have to think about it again. Thing with dogs, they die, right? And they're a big, big part of your life, and it's devastating when you lose them. And the first thing you think to do is not to go cancel your automatic dog food delivery. So a couple weeks later, dog food comes after you just lost your dog. It's devastating. You call them, you go to cancel it. This is what they do every single time because they've identified that as a recurring moment. They credit back the last bag of food. They can't take it back for health code issues, so they say give it away to anyone that needs it. And then 2 days later, you get flowers from Chewy saying sorry for your loss. That maybe cost them $25. When you have a dog, you're very likely going to get another dog. You're never going to buy dog food from anyone else ever again. It's a recurring moment. They exist everywhere. If you've ever gone to a restaurant with a baby and they brought you crayons and a placemat, that's an example of this. It's just a real basic, lazy one. Figure out the recurring moments. Get creative. And my challenge to you is within the next month, do one of them. If you go home with that intention, one starts to get more pretty quickly.
That's great. What comes to mind when he's laying that out to you? That could be, and you got your coworker here to help out, phone a friend. What's a potential recurring moment that you're thinking of right now?
Well, you're talking about life events, things like that mean something to somebody. We get insight into those pretty regularly because you might be on the phone with somebody for longer than you'd want to on occasion, and having these kind of repetitive things.
But is there like an issue, a tech issue that people call you about frequently?
I'm going to defer to the guy that's closer to the front lines.
The thing that came to mind is we manage clients' networks, and so one of the things we do is whenever they hire someone, we are creating their accounts and doing those things. I don't have any real concrete thoughts around it, but we're there on somebody's first day of work.
Yeah.
Every single time for 250-ish clients.
I mean,
and we're the first person often that they talk to outside of HR. And so we could build something around that. I haven't got any real structure yet, but it's the first thing that came
you
to
identified
mind.
a great recurring moment.
Yeah. But by the way, the best way to find what you should do is to get a group of people around a table, and then everyone feels a great sense of ownership in what you come up with anyway.
Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, I love that.
Good. All right, great. All right, so we're going to take one more question. He's got a dual question, he said. Okay, go ahead.
In your book, you talked about the quote, most people want to be heard more than agreed with. I think that's such an important thing, especially with leadership and even what I've experienced in corporate America of kind of this authoritative decision-making versus actually listening to people. How can that relate to not only different industries and even coincidentally, as far as what Ken, you've talked about of just having a conversation with your coworker with things that are politically charged? How do you have a conversation, walk away as friends, as that understanding where you hear somebody more, but still allow them to feel valued in how you're listening to them? So,
Yeah, so, and I'll give you a couple different examples. I'm sure everyone here has had the experience of getting really bad customer service somewhere. Let's say you rent a car and you rent an SUV and you show up there and they're like, yeah, we don't have an SUV, but we have this mid-sized Kia to give you with zero acknowledgement. And all you want them to do is just say, hey, I'm sorry. I know you probably wanted an SUV and we don't have it. And there's nothing I can do about it, but I just want to acknowledge that that's probably what you wanted. Immediately, you feel better. But no one will ever apologize for anything. And sometimes all you need to do is just acknowledge that you feel what the person is feeling, and that on its own is enough. The good inside the book I was talking about before with Dr. Becky Kennedy, one of my favorite things that she talks about is like, my daughter wants ice cream for breakfast. Obviously, she's not going to get it. But just saying, hey, I get it. I want ice cream for breakfast too. You can't have it because my job is to take care of you and keep you healthy, but I understand that. I just think there's such power in actually hearing people, acknowledging them, showing them that you understand their perspective. You don't need to give them what they want. Sometimes you can't. But doing that one simple thing, I think, is such a beautiful step towards it. And oftentimes, even when you're debating an idea with someone, you might not agree with them, and you're ultimately not gonna do the thing they want you to do. But just giving them the time to hear them out, I think is such a beautiful investment in the relationship. And sometimes we're so focused on efficiency that we skip that all too crucial step of investing a few moments just to allow someone to realize that you may not do what they want you to do, but you care enough about them to hear them out.
Yeah. Yeah, I've messed this one up politically. I've messed when I was in politics. I've messed this up relationally. Sure, we all have, and I think that one of the things I learned, when you're so passionate about something and you're so fired up for it, if you're not careful, you come across as like I've got it figured out, and they're not even looking for that, So on this. I mentioned this on the show because political talk around the office, so I'll address it that way. One of the things I've learned the hard way, and I messed this up as a very young, fiery political operative with my liberal friends, everything was a debate. And it was like, I'm trying to counterpoint you. And then I realized one day, I'm not going to ever counterpoint anybody.
Yeah.
So in today's hyper supercharged political stuff at the office, it's kind of hard to get away from it. So if you're going to have that conversation, what I've learned by screwing up is to understand why they believe what they believe. And then you can come across as very respectful because you actually are. It's not an act, but you're actually going, help me understand, why do you believe in that policy? And why do you believe it? And let them, because you're never going to counterpoint anybody. You're never going to get them on your side. And so the way to avoid the tension around certainly the political stuff in the office is that just go, tell me more about that. Tell me more. And I want to understand that. And okay, all right, I understand where you're coming from. That does not mean you agree with them.
Yeah.
And so it's a tricky thing, but it's back to that issue. They just want to feel like you respect the fact that I disagree with you.
Yeah, and honestly, it's one of the biggest issues in America right now is we're not curious enough. It's a massive
issue, yeah.
We're not curious enough. Be curious.
Yeah.
Who knows? You might wake up one day and say, oh,
right.
That actually makes a little sense.
Right. Well, first of all, you don't demonize somebody for their very strongly held conviction when you realize, well, they come from this environment and they grew up this way.
Yeah.
And this is how they see it. You hear of policy and you see this. They hear of policy. They see something completely different. And I think that is a real issue. We've gotten more divided. And the ability to sit with somebody and have a spirited conversation without it turning into this
Well, and
war.
oftentimes we're like spinning a little bit into a different direction, but it's wild to me if you approach every one of those conversations from a place of curiosity as opposed to trying to get them to agree with you or vice versa.
Yeah, certainty. Take the certainty away and replace it with some curiosity.
You often figure out that you have a lot more in common than
That's
don't.
good. Yeah, it's really true. Really good. Love that. Okay, I want to come back to a couple really quick, these are little quick questions because I'm just curious. What are you mentioned one earlier, give me the list, top 2 or 3 of what you would call your super talents.
I think that words matter. I think that everyone says, like, walk the walk, don't talk the talk. And a leader inspires more through actions than anything, but being able to articulate very clearly to the people around you what you stand for, where you're going, and how you intend to get there is one of the great strengths of a good leader. And it's something that I've gotten good at. I was always kind of good at it, but I've pursued it as a practice. I want to get better at articulating my ideas and my belief systems as well as possible because people can rally around shared language, and it's something that you need to be able to give them.
It's good.
I'm very detail-oriented, and yet I don't take myself too seriously. By the way, everything I say I'm good at, these are things that I aspire to do consistently every day. Even what you said before I thought was really important. Like, I mess this up all the time. No one's perfect. We're all trying to do this stuff. And when I talk about stuff, I don't want it to be misconstrued as I'm perfect at this stuff. No one is. I endeavor to be the leader that when I walk into a room, people are checking themselves to make sure everything is where it's supposed to be. And they're also excited to see me. That I'm going to hold people accountable to a certain standard of excellence, and I'm also going to make it fun as we pursue it together.
Yeah, that's good.
I'd say those are the 2
Yeah.
I'd seize on now.
Yeah. I think the easy answer is for you to say unreasonable hospitality to this, but I'm just curious the result that you're most motivated by, whether you're giving a speech, writing a book, guesting guesting on the Bear, whatever you're doing. What would you say in a few words is that result that you're most motivated by?
So at my conference, the Welcome Conference, whenever I'm working with a speaker who's coming in, sometimes we bring in like professional speakers, and I'm just like, all right, show up and do your thing. For people who I really believe they have a message to share and they don't oftentimes take a stage, and I coach them leading up to it, the question I always ask them is, what action are you hoping to inspire in the people in the audience?
Yes.
And so that's how I'm going to answer it. With everything I do, the action I'm hoping to inspire is that people care a little bit more and try a little bit harder in pursuing relationships with other people. And that they bring the same amount of creativity to that as they do the beauty of the films they're producing, or the efficiency of how many boxes they can put in the truck, or you name it. That it's all the little soft skills are approached with the same discipline and creativity and intention.
Yeah. You really model this, and I'm blessed to have a friendship with you and know all these little stories. We've seen, many people can look this up, and I want to end with this because I think it's a great way to kind of encapsulate you have this radical pursuit of excellence. And it's a beautiful thing to see.
Thank you.
I saw a story, I saw you share this story on The Tonight Show, but I want you to share it with our audience. The time that you fed Jimmy Fallon in space. You took him to space, because this is, when I saw this story, I said, I got to get him to share this, because this is excellence. And you do this, by the way, for people that aren't celebrities. So this isn't about you did it for Jimmy Fallon because he was Jimmy Fallon. This is just how you operate. Share that story.
Well, it's, by the way, more fun to do for the people that aren't celebrities, because celebrities get special stuff all the time.
Right.
So maybe they'll tell the story a certain number of times. You do it to someone who doesn't receive stuff like this all the time.
Yeah.
It's a sentence in their autobiography.
That's right.
Jimmy Fallon, when we became the #1 restaurant in the world, sent me a note, and it said, first #1 in New York, then #1 in America, now #1 in the world. What's next? Space? And so he came to the restaurant a couple weeks later. And they got through their entree, and I walked over to the table. I was like, hey, for your next course, you got to come with me. And the Dreamweavers that whole day had been working on this thing. And the restaurant was 2 floors with an elevator that went from floor 1 to 2, just ADA access to the private dining room. And we brought him into the hallway near the elevator, and my team, we'd bought astronaut costumes. And I was like, you got to put these on first. And so it's Jimmy. So he's like super excited. He's like, oh my God. Right. And so he puts on his astronaut costume, and his friend puts theirs on. And then we open the elevator, and we had made the inside cab of the elevator look like the inside of a rocket ship. Yeah. And we had kind of blacked out all the buttons except for 2, just said launch. So we pressed launch, and then it went up to the site, just went up 1 floor. And then the elevator doors open, and we had taken that entire lobby area and made it look like you were on Mars. And so there was dry ice and smoke machines, and we had him plant a flag, and then the kitchen team had basically created an entire dessert course that looked like space food. And so it was like, well, yeah, let's take it to space. And the Maya Angelou quote.
Yes.
People will forget what you say, they will forget what you do, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. We spent all day on that course. But every other dish he ate that night, we'd spent months developing those recipes, days prepping every ingredient. He didn't remember a single one of those dishes. No. He'll never forget how we made them feel when we brought them to space. I believe hospitality is the greatest investment you can make as a business and your greatest competitive advantage, because yes, we spent some money on that. But when you give people stories like that to tell, they're going to tell them. And every once in a while, they end up getting told on The Tonight Show.
Yeah.
And the ROI on a couple $100 that we spent in some space suits and some
Yeah.
dry ice was astronomical.
Yeah.
Invest in people.
Yep.
Invest in relationships. Don't take yourself too seriously. And it's nothing short of extraordinary where it can take you.
You said words matter. Those are the words we will end on because you cannot make it any better than that. Audience, will you show Will some
Thank you.
love for being with us?
Thank you,
It's
guys.
so good. Oh my goodness. I love it. I said at the start of the show that a good conversation can change your life. And I know that Will gave us all so much that we can use. And I'm going to give you one thing that really stuck out to me, and I'm going to use it in my life to make those that I come in contact with better, my personal life and my professional life. It was the idea of reoccurring moments, to be so aware, so present in the moment of each day, to find those moments, those opportunities that are recurring all the time, opportunities for us to step into those moments and make them special for the people that we interact with. Again, this is a win for us in our relationships and a win for us in our professional life as well. So, so good. Well, I want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you for joining us here on Front Row Seat. We'll be back really soon.